David, hello.
Hello.
It would be fantastic if you could tell us about
Okay.
H276.
David Hall, Legislative Counsel. This is H276, an act relating to creating a rental housing registry. This is the version 8.1 that came out of House General and Housing. Do you want a high-level overview of everything going on, or just jump straight to the fee business? What would you prefer?
I think everything. Thank you.
All right. So you may or may not recall that last year, was it last year? You adopted legislation that transferred the nominal primary state authority for rental housing, health and safety to the Department of Public Safety, Division of Fire Safety. Originally part of that package was this component. It's in the same title, the same chapter. This new section 2678 rental housing registration that sort of went along with that. This is committed to DHCD, Housing Community Development, not to public safety. And I just want to make sure right from the start, we are not conflating the state's authority and, capacity and applicability of rental housing, health and safety standards versus registration standards, okay? So right now, remember, DPS under that law has the authority to inspect rental housing on complaint. This is a separate set of requirements that has different exceptions, different applicability. It's in DHCD, okay?
Thank you.
So we are talking about what properties need to be registered with the state through DHCD. So you'll see here in A, there's an annual requirement. The deadline is basically March 1st. The trigger is, how was the property used in the prior calendar year? And if it was a long-term rental, that's not a term of art, but think of it that way. Somebody's primary residence, it's rented, so it's subject to 9 VSA Chapter 137. Or if it's a short-term rental, and again, was it used in the prior calendar year on either of those bases? If so, you have a duty to register with the Department of Housing and Community Development, pay an annual registration fee of $35 per unit, and provide the information here in 1 through 9. So that's name and mailing address of the owner, landlord, property manager, phone, email of the owner, landlord, property manager, location of the unit, year built, type of rental unit, number of units in the building, span number, accessibility of the unit, any other information department deems appropriate.
What does accessibility in this case mean of the unit?
I believe that is interpreted to mean whether it is ADA compliant or not, wheelchair adaptable or accessible, et cetera. So those are the units that need to apply, and these are the exceptions. So the way this is structured, it is really around categories of types of housing, and then it offers some specific examples using the including construct that's typical in the way we put the statutes together, right? So for B1, the category is basically a unit that is licensed or registered already with another program. So that manifests in A, we're talking about local programs, right? So there are municipalities already that operate their own programs. You already have to register with them. You already have to pay a fee for them. So the way that works, or at least it envisioned in this bill, is that you will continue to be able to register with your local program. The local program has a requirement of at least annually reporting its information to the state. And to the extent you already have to pay a fee to that municipality for its program, you do not also have to pay a fee to the state. There's no double charge there. So it could be the case theoretically that you are registered and paying a fee to the town, in which case you don't have to also register and pay a fee to the state. Now, the town program does have to collect and provide the same information that the state requires here.
Is the town gonna deliver the information to the state?
And that is a requirement imposed upon these municipal programs in this section.
Thank you.
It's upon request, and at least annually, they have to update the state with their data. So that's one kind of unit licensed or registered with another program. Another is a licensed lodging establishment. So the registration and fee requirements imposed do not apply to a licensed lodging establishment as defined in 18 VSA 4301. That's because they're already licensed with the state. They're already regulated. They already pay the fee. We already know who they are. So presumably, not presumably, I mean, the intent is that DOH would be able to supply that information to DHCD.
Okay. Yes.
One of the big hassles in computers is when you pass data from one organization to another, and there's all kinds of, you have to set up protocols and all this kind of stuff. Is that sort of going to be done in rulemaking on this, or are they just going to say, yeah, one municipality sends a spreadsheet, the other one sends a different, how does that get handled?
That could be the $10 million question.
There isn't a whole IT section further down in this.
Okay.
The way that gets handled is this law doesn't take effect for a few years, and ADS is going to come back with a report telling you whether and how this is going to work and how much it's going to cost.
Okay, thank you.
It's the right question. The third bit here is the registered mobile home lot. So we already have through DHCD a requirement that mobile homes register through the mobile home program. They also have to pay a fee for that. They have to provide the information basically that we're asking for in this bill. So this says, if you're renting just the lot in the park and you've already registered the park and the lot and that info is already present at DHCD, the mobile home division, you don't have to do that again. You would have to register a mobile home itself if it was offered as a rental, because that's not part of their work. We're talking about the lot here. And to the extent you pay a fee already, you only need to pay the difference if you have to register.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next category are units not offered to the general public. You may remember this from previous iterations of this proposed legislation. So these requirements, the fee and the registration, do not apply to a unit that an owner provides to another person, whether or not for consideration, if and only to the extent that the owner does not otherwise make the unit available for lease to the general public. And that includes some examples here. Housing provided to a member of the owner's family or personal acquaintances, housing provided to a person who is not related to the member's household, occupies the housing part of a nonprofit home share, housing provided to a person for personal care, and housing provided as a benefit of farm employment.
David, we could go
A little faster?
just a little though.
Okay. The last exception here is for non-permanent residences. So this is for units that are not designed or constructed for use as a permanent residence. They don't have adequate water, et cetera. Electricity, heat, sanitation, insulation. So DHCD will administer this in coordination with other agencies. C2 is a requirement that municipalities supply their information at least annually to the department. D relates to the protection of data. So this data would be exempt from the Public Records Act. Department can only disclose it pursuant to this section to other state or government entities, nonprofits, or to persons for the purpose of protecting public health and safety. Not for a commercial purpose, and the department shall require that if they do give this data to anybody else, the recipient can't use it for a commercial purpose or further dissemination. E, you might like to know about, creates a rental housing safety special fund. So the fees would go into that fund. It would be used to design and implement the registry. You'll see on page 6, there is a penalty for failure to register. It's $200 per unit for the knowing failure to register. That penalty does not take effect at the same time as the registry. That's also further delayed. 3 authorizes DHCD 1.5 positions to administer the fund. So here's the ADS part in 7. This is the report from ADS conducting a project assessment through the ROI part of the process to assess the cost for creating it and coming back to committees. There's a $25,000 appropriation for that work. The next 2 pieces change gears from the registry, don't have any fee implications. They are studies and reports about crisis standards of housing and homelessness response. I don't know if you want to spend a lot of time on those, but
Just understand what we do before we vote on them.
I'm sorry.
Well, enough that we understand what we're voting on. Great.
Okay.
So there are working groups that do what?
So the first one here, so this is DCF plan to implement crisis standards for housing. And truthfully, I didn't write this. I didn't staff this. I don't exactly know why they're doing it or what it does there. I forgot it was in here. Katie McLean worked on this. It's a human services piece.
And this is basically UGA housing planning.
I believe so.
Okay. That seems important. Like really important. I'm not saying that to you, David, like you should know what it is. I'm just saying like for the committee, that's a very important thing for the legislature to do, to make an actual plan on this issue rather than continuing to punt planning. Yes.
I'm a little bit curious whether we would want to leave exception for the inadequately equipped unit. And I say that because not only is it exempt from the fee, but it's also exempt from registration. And I'm wondering whether, owing to other work that we are interested in, we want it known, registered, but not necessarily a fee paid. It's lumped together under the exceptions.
I think inadequate facility becomes David, you might know more than I do. I imagine that becomes an incredibly slippery slope of knowing what is or isn't in that like is a shed, is a tent, is a 3-sided camp, like what counts as even inadequate, like within the scope of an inadequate facility is like just a piece of plywood with no walls in an inadequate facility. People, right?
No argument.
I could keep on going with examples of hypothetically inadequate facilities if you want me to.
I just, because it came up in a prior life.
Yes, no, I hear you. Yeah.
So you'll see in 9 and 10, it does not apply to a unit that is not designed or constructed for use as a permanent residence. So the including inadequate facilities are non-exhaustive, but the category is it's not a permanent residence. So for your work, it may be a different calculus. For purposes of the registry from the housing world side, the philosophy was we're trying to get a census of where people can actually live. Are they being supplanted by SDRs? Are they, how many units or where? If this is a place that people can't actually live more than some of the time, then it's not something we necessarily need to know about. So that was the philosophical underpinning of the exception. I have no other comment about whether it's advisable.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So let's see, 6, homelessness response systems analysis, AHS working group. people with experience of homelessness, continuing care programs, others. Will review, develop, and provide recommendations on Vermont's homelessness response and prevention programs, governance system, assessment of statewide plans, with recommendations on how to align the federal goal to reduce homelessness by 25% in accordance with the federal strategic plan to prevent end homelessness, addressing disparities, silos, supply and access of housing, response systems, reducing risk, et cetera. And that's part, again, I think that is required as part of the work. Federal funding may require, but again, specific questions.
Say that again, that last sentence.
I thought that this was part of the process that the state needs to go through in conjunction with some of its federal funding and planning. But specific questions on this, unfortunately, you'd have to direct to Katie McLean.
Questions about the bill before we hear about the fiscal note, which might be of greater interest to us.
I do want to note the effective dates because while those human services sections are effective on passage, the report from ADS section takes effect in July with a report back in January of next year. The registration requirements and the DACD positions don't take effect until 25. And then the penalty doesn't take effect until March of 26.
Okay, thank you.
Just to kind of understand that sequence, what I think I hear you saying is we're asking ADS to like figure out how much this is gonna cost and what's gonna need for something. And before we have those answers, we're implementing the program, but that won't start until after we have the report?
Yes, all right. I mean, the law will exist in the books, but won't actually take effect until 2025, which, theoretically gives you time to change it or repeal it or do something different, if that's what you choose to do.
And then, did the committee take testimony or hear, so my understanding is that there exists a landlord certificate
Yes.
that landlords are obligated to, and that provides a lot of the information that I think we're asking for in section one.
Yes.
Maybe not all of it. Was there discussion on whether we could use the existing things that we ask landlords to provide?
Yes.
Instead of creating a whole new thing to ask some of the same questions?
Yes, there was.
Can you provide a high level summary of why we didn't use it?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that. That's the policy choice that the committee made. They heard from Commissioner Bolio. There is the landlord certificate. It does indeed provide most of the information required here. It has to be prepared and available by October of each year upon request to any member of the public in a searchable database. So there's competing interests involved in who does the work, where it's located, how it's used, et cetera.
To that point, it sounds like we did already fund last year 5 positions to provide the health and safety inspections, and that those are included in the.
And let's save that for the conversation about joint fiscal, because David's not the reporter of the bill. He's just the poor innocent drafter of the bill.
The poor unfortunate soul. Any questions on the?
At least it's his own name, not his daughter's.
Any other questions on the mechanism? The dates are very interesting. Thank you for making sure we notice them. Okay.
All right.
If you could hang out, David, if possible, that would be great while we hear the fiscal note.
Do you know how long you're going to be running?
We are finishing this agenda item at 11:30. But we might need to make some amendments. It'd be easier to not have to.
By noon, I have to have the entire workforce bill to appropriations.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, plenty.
You changed it, but I mean, that's probably 20 something minutes of work, so I can stick around for a little bit.
Okay, thanks. Or if you could just be responsive to your email, that would be.
Or, you know what, I can sign in from my office and.
Oh, that would be awesome. Thank you. We would love that.
Forgot about the whole Zoom option somehow.
We do. We look forward to you zooming in from your committee, from your office. Thank you. Enjoy your work. Hi.
For the record, to Barnett Joint Fiscal, I'm gonna share my screen. So to run through the fiscal note on this one, reiterating, there is an annual $35 registration fee per rental unit with certain exceptions. These fees are going to flow into the Rental Housing Safety Special Fund, which can be used by DPS and DHCD for staffing and other rental housing registration and inspection related costs. It also authorizes 1.5 full-time classified positions within DHCD. It includes the general fund appropriation for ADS to conduct a request for information, which is a project assessment of how much it might cost to build this database. And then there's also the reporting requirements. For the fee revenue, we are anticipating a first year kind of $900,000 increase in revenues from the fee. That number comes from the $35 registration fee. We estimated about 64,000 rental units in the state that are not subject to the municipal Burlington and larger towns inspection requirements already. And in the first year, we're anticipating a pretty low, and I'll probably scroll down to a table to make this easier to see. We're anticipating a pretty low take-up in the first year because the administrative penalty doesn't kick in until 9 months after the program starts. And so we're just anticipating that it'll take time for folks to hear about the program, comply, get on board. So we're anticipating 40%. This is in line with previous budgets presented by the Rental Housing Authority Board in previous legislation. And so that's the group of people who have experience, and that's what they forecasted for the first year in fiscal year 26. In future years, we're anticipating that there will be a range of participation from 60 to 80%. At the low end, that generates $1.3 million in fee revenue. And at high rates of participation, it's about $1.8 million in fee revenue. The maximum, if everyone who has a rental unit participates, we're looking at about 2.2 million. So it really just depends on take up. And the Rental Housing Advisory Board kind of had a staged effect where they're anticipating 10% of the rental units would come on board each year. So it's a long ramp up. To go into a little more information about the estimate, the Census Bureau estimates there are about $75,000 rental units in the state. About 21,000 of those are covered by Burlington's and larger towns existing inspection requirements. And then AirDNA has information on short-term rentals, and there are about 10,000 short-term rentals. And this has increased quite a bit from the pandemic. So that leaves us with a net of 64,000 units total. And so this section talks a little bit more about kind of the increase in program participation. On the cost side, we don't have an estimate for the cost right now. The bill just authorizes positions. Those positions can be paid for with fee revenue. And so that we put a number of $200,000 on those positions, but it's covered by fee revenue. It could be spent in fiscal year 26, but there's no appropriation for any sort of positions.
Can you back up a second to, okay, the timeline here with all the different implementation dates?
Yes.
Thank you.
So this table.
So when are we spending for the positions?
So the positions would start in fiscal year 26.
Okay.
Yep.
When we start having revenue.
Correct.
Okay. But not anywhere close to what we're collecting.
Correct.
Thank you. Representative Andrews.
That answered my question.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And
I mean, we all know that I've been championing the fees like no one's business lately, but I actually feel uncomfortable with that a little bit. Representative Sims.
I And I guess I want to understand all the different positions, because we have already 5 positions that we created last year for the health and safety inspection,
Which is in a different
which is in a
department,
different department.
agency even, yeah?
So all of the positions that we're talking about here are just to maintain new said registry.
The registry, exactly.
And again, we are, like, step 1 is charging ADS to just even figure out what it's gonna cost and take to maintain it, and then they're gonna report back to us. And one option could be to wait until we receive that report to decide whether to implement the registry and the fee system. I mean, I guess I'm not asking you that, I'm.
Right, yes.
And I guess I'm thinking.
Yes, that is an option. You can do whatever you want.
Yes.
And I guess I'm thinking about what we did with the bottle bill, where we set targets and the original version sort of asked ANR to immediately inflate fees if we weren't meeting our targets. We amended that to say, report back to us and let us decide whether we want to increase fees or not. I guess to me, it seems like section 1 of this bill gets kind of ahead of the other sections of the bill, which say, like, please tell us what this is going to cost and what's going to take to maintain it. And feeling like I would like to better understand that before we create a whole new system, when I also understand that the landlord certificate that landlords are obligated to already submit includes much of this data. So just sharing my hand.
And yes, that would be a policy type of question.
So when is the ADS report due back?
I would have to, let's see if it is in
David
here.
rejoined us,
Hopefully I can phone a friend, and Pat's also here.
and David has rejoined us.
I have rejoined you.
Thank you. When is the ADS report due?
I believe it is January, but I'm pulling it up now.
January 24.
And so hypothetically, we could hear how much the program would cost in January of '24. And then set the fee then and still have enough money by '26.
That's the theory. It's January 15th. And it's through the request for information, which based on ADS is, maybe you need to hear from ADS, but I believe that that's the stage at which they'd have a better understanding of what the cost is.
Okay. So we could find out in FY '24 and calendar year '24. It's nice when they're both the same. How much money we need to raise with the fee. And still have and if that number is accurate, still have all the money by '26. Does that match your timeline?
Yes.
Okay, that makes logical sense to you. Okay. Even if we're not doing something that's effective until July 1st. So if in May of 2024, we made something that was effective in July of 2024, would all the systems be in place in time to collect the revenue needed for FY '26?
That is a good implementation question for the folks who have IT.
Yes.
So Pat Dickerson joined.
Hi, Pat.
That was the testimony that Hutch General received from ADS on for getting this.
Okay.
And I mean,
Please do
just
so.
a little bit of history, and we touched on this a little bit from the construct of this last year. So there was $400,000 in ARPA funds put towards those 5 inspector positions that you referenced. Sort of one-time money, and the idea of I see that there's a little mismatch here between the 200,000 we're talking about and the fee revenue. The idea at the time was that going forward, those inspector positions would be funded out of the special fund. Covered by that, and even at that time, the estimate was a little bit above what we were anticipating those 5 positions to cost, but the idea was that as fee revenue became available, they would be able to appropriately scale up the number of inspectors that they needed to cover the state. So
That is such helpful context. So how much do those inspectors cost?
So the 5 positions so they were appropriated for $400,000 in ARPA funds last year. They could use that much they had 5 positions authorized. They could use that amount to hire as many as that could afford. But the estimate that we had for last year for those 5 positions was $550 annually.
Oh,
I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong.
you're welcome to come sit together if that feels more comfortable for you. It's up to you.
My understanding is that the governor's recommend includes general fund dollars for those positions, and so some of my earlier points, I guess, I believe regulating apartments for health and safety is a public good. And that my preference is that we usually pay for public goods out of general fund, not fees, which can be, I think, more regressive. And so this feels like a shift from funding those health and safety positions from general funds to a fee-based.
Well, actually, the Health and Safety Fund has historically been underfunded, and we heard testimony when we were writing our budget memo about the fire safe. Someone help me with the name of the fund, fire safety, special fire
inspection.
What's the fund called?
I don't
If you
remember off the top of my
asked
head.
one of you last night, I don't even remember what it was. Okay. The fire inspection special fund or whatever it is also chronically underfunded and is associated with rental inspections as well. Because of the fees.
And just, if I may.
Yes.
Quickly about the new, so for this year, so the ARPA dollars that were allocated to this last year for those positions, those are one time. So until the fee revenue becomes available, those positions would need to be funded and, through some kind of appropriation.
Representative Andrews.
Forgive me for asking the world's most basic question here, but am I to understand that we have 5 positions as inspectors for this program that is not yet stood up?
You have 5 positions authorized. I'm sorry, I don't know how many they've actually been able to hire since then.
Yep.
But there are 5 authorized to take care of the complaint-driven system here.
Got it.
That leads to those inspections happening, because these inspections don't happen like on a schedule.
David's gonna jump in.
It has.
I want to make sure you're continuing to keep separate in your minds the legal authority and duties. The inspectors are in public safety. That authority happened last year. This bill only relates to the Department of Housing and Community Development's registry, and they are not otherwise related. I mean, you can make them related in the funding nexus, but substantively, those inspector positions don't have anything to do with the duty or authority under this bill.
Thank you, David.
And this would require additional positions to maintain the registry, which we don't have an estimate from ADS on the cost, which may ask landlords to provide duplicative information, which they are already providing through their landlord certificate, which maybe could be adapted to yield the additional information that Section 1 asks for.
David?
I should have stayed, huh?
Sorry. I don't know if anyone really thinks of workforce as a priority, do they? That was a joke for the record. So if the timeline, I want to sort of check in on this timeline again, just because my brain is a little frazzled and I'm having trouble imagining timelines in my mind. If we required an authorization for the new fee next year pending the report from IT, given the timeline for ADS completion, do you imagine does that mess up the timeline and the rest of the bill that you've worked through?
Well, so.
Because on the chart, it doesn't, but I imagine that there are all kinds of things that could happen.
I honestly haven't looked at the chart. I don't know what that says, but remember that the registration requirement would take effect in July of 25. You wouldn't start getting money until the next spring. So March 1st, 26 would be the deadline for actually registering and paying the fee. So even though the law would take effect in the summer of 25, the money wouldn't come in until the spring of 26. So I think everybody suspects there's going to be a requirement for bridge funding for the positions and for the work. And that's, I presume that is what happens after you get the ADS report. They're going to say, this is going to cost 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, who knows, to build, and then some percentage of that to maintain. And, that all those details really get hammered out depending on what ADS says, I think is the intention.
I appreciate that. And it's not as if we're going to be collecting revenue in advance of that enough that we would be building up a reserve to cover that bridge, which would be a construct which would also perhaps work, but is not this construct. Right? We're not building up any bridge.
Right. There's no way to get the fee revenue without a registry.
Absolutely.
You can't have a registry until you build it, and you can't build it unless you pay for it. So reverse engineer that schedule. I don't know what it looks like.
It seems like there's sufficient time within the timeline that we could do step one now without messing up the other imagined steps, but that we don't have to initiate all the steps now. So I'm wondering if there's a possible path here that doesn't mess up the timeline of the things we might imagine as future steps, but just start with step one, the ADS piece, so we have more information to inform decisions later.
So that seems like a big leap into a timeline that I don't think we fully understand. What I could see is delaying the setting of the fee until we get the ADS report back in FY 24, January 2024. I think I need like a big banner of like FYs and calendars going across the top. That'd be great. Wouldn't that be so soothing?
Yeah, we got our table, but we didn't get the visualization.
Yes. Okay. Does that make sense to folks?
Do you think we want to hear from ADS?
No. I mean, we, just because of the minutes in our lives available to us. If you could consult with ADS, that would be great. Thank you very much. David?
Yes.
Can you make that amendment for us?
I'm not sure what you're asking for. I'm sorry.
That's such a good, thank you for asking what we're asking. To have the fee not be set or implemented until after the ADS report gets back. So sort of an intent to set a fee in 2024, because this is 2023 that we're living in right now.
Are you saying that you want the law that will prospectively take effect in 2025 to not include a dollar figure for a fee?
Yes, and some intent language around setting a fee. That the report that from ADS will go to Ways and Means so that they can set a fee to blah, blah, blah.
I mean, yes, I can definitely do that.
Do you see problems in that? I I heard a pause from you, but I don't know if the pause was that you were like, that doesn't actually make sense, but I don't want to tell you that.
I don't, no, I guess,
Okay.
I guess I'm just not sure that it matters since the whole thing will be, have to be changed based on what they say, but not just the fee possibly, but other pieces, including not limited to its, whether it even happens, but and that's
Okay.
not until 25. But it that doesn't really matter. I mean, you can absolutely do it the way you just proposed, and it's not hard to change.
I just have another question because of the importance of that report on January 15th of 2024. In the description of that, where, let's see, in draft 8.1 on page 7, where it describes the report, is it clear enough in there that the report itself is due on January 15th?
I think so.
Okay. If you're good with it, I'm good with it. Okay.
I just, so, for me to take the fee piece out of the proposed section.
It doesn't make
of law,
sense. It doesn't make sense to have an implementation date on a registration and not have an implementation date, not have a fee connected to it. That is, because if we don't act, we're going to wind up with people registering and no fee, right?
Right. And potentially, yes. And I'll have to rewrite the whole law so it doesn't, which isn't a lot, but it'll change it fairly significantly because it references the fee requirement, in every piece. And there's interplay between fees and other to the towns or not, to other programs or not. So, you could.
Again,
You could leave it as it is.
just ask for the report.
Let us take a break, and Representative Sims, who seems more invested and excited about this than anyone else, is going to take some time with you. And then we're going to come back to this before we go to the floor.
What time are you
Also
going?
saving workforce.
We're all going to figure it out somehow. Okay?
What
Thank
time
you.
are you going to the floor?
At 1.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can try to make that work.
Okay.
So I'm gonna be busy until at least 12:15, 12:30 is my guess.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.